Okay. Gimel Daled. Margins of a holy scroll, whether those on the top of the scroll or those on the bottom or at the beginning or at the end, render tamei hands that touch them. Rabbi Yehuda says the margin at the end of the small scroll does not render hands tamei unless one made a roller for it. A scroll of scripture that was erased, but there remained 85 letters, as many as there are in the passage, and when the ark would journey, renders tamei hands that touch it. A sheet of parchment on which there are written 85 letters, as many as there are in the passage, and when the ark would journey, renders tamei hands that touch it. All the holy scripture render tamei hands that touch them. Shir Hashirim and Koheles render tamei hands that touch them. And Rabbi Yehuda says Shir Hashirim renders hands tamei, but Koheles is the subject of a dispute. Rabbi Yossi says Koheles does not render hands tamei, and Shir Hashirim is the subject of a dispute. Rabbi Shimon says, as regards Koheles, it is one of Beis Shammai's legencies and Beis Hillel's stringencies. Reb Shimon ben Azai said, I have a tradition received from the 72 elders on the day that they appointed Reb Elazar ben Azariah as head of the yeshiva that both Shir Shirim and Koheles render tamei hands that touch them. Reb Akiva said, heaven forbid, no Jewish person ever argued about Shir Shirim, that it does not render tamei hands that touch it. Never was the whole world worthy as on the day when Shir Shirim was given to the Jews. For all of Kesuvim is holy, but Shir Shirim is the holy of holies. If ever they did dispose, they only disputed regarding Koheles. Rabbi Yochanan, the son of Yeshua, the son of Rebbe Akiva's son-in-law, said, in accordance with the words of Ben Azai, so they disputed and so they decided. I never really knew that about Shir Shirim. It was interesting when we learned this yesterday, that
Yeah,
that was considered the top, top thing.
yeah, we've done
And
this.
that
And this Mishnah is there's a similar the same sort of ideas are expressed in this Mishnah somewhere else, and I just have gone blank on where else it is mentioned in the Mishnah, but the same passage basically is quoted in another Mishnah.
On that day, they were counted. On that day, they resolved regarding a footbed that measured between two lugam and one kaban that got cracked. That it is susceptible to tumor midras, where Rebbe Kiva says it is considered a footbed in its name. Okay,
Okay, just mentioning something up here. All right. Right.
one more,
Bobayom.
one more.
Bobayom. This is me now. Bobayom Amru.
Right.
So also on the day that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah came in, Kol hazvachim shenizbechu shelo lishman kasherim, ele shelo alu lebalim l'shum chova chutz min haPesach min haChatas. So this is something that we learned like right at the beginning of Maseches Zvachim. Okay, but here we're getting some background because we've been talking about all the things that were passing on the day that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah became the Nasi. Okay, so the halacha is that any korban that was brought for the wrong shame. So the Baalim said to himself, okay, this is going to be shlamim, and the Kohen looked at it and said, okay, this is an olah. So he shechted it as an olah, and he shechted it thinking that it was an olah, and he said, wait, you said this was an olah, or you said it was shlamim? He said, no, I said it was shlamim. He says, oh no, I'm so sorry, I shechted it to al das that it's going to be an olah. And what's the answer? Is that it's still kosher. It still can be it still can be eaten as a shlamim. But if this korban was brought as something that was meant to be a chova for the balim, so if he was bringing it as something because he made a neder on a dava,
Mhm.
then he has to bring another one,
Oh,
okay, in order to make it up. But nonetheless, it's still kosher lemizbeach. Okay. Shelo lishman. Okay, except the exceptions to this rule are the Pesach and the Chatas. The Pesach bismano v'Chatas b'chol zman. So in other words, if a korban Chatas was brought and the Kohen shechted it thinking that this was a shlamim, it's puzzle completely. It has to be taken out and burned outside the mikdash.
but I'm
Okay,
confused. Though we just said that the person brought and said it's a shlomin, and the
that's
Kohen thought it was a
the
kalos.
exception. This is the exception of what he's saying. It's a Chatas is the exception. So the
Okay.
general rule is for other korbanos, it's acceptable. It can go to the mizbech, but for chatas, it's pasul, and the same goes for a korban pesach on the day of pesach. Okay. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Afa Asham. He says no, the Asham is the same as the Chatas. It's got the same halachas as the Chatas, even obviously the Asham is male and the Chatas is female. But other than that, a Pesach Bisman of a Chatas, the Asham b'chol zman. So in all cases, Rabbi Eliezer holds that the halacha of the Asham is parallel to that of the Chatas. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Azai, Mekublani pi shivim shnaim zaken. He says, I have a Masorah from 72 from 72 Chachamim. B'yom Shiva is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah b'yeshiva. On that day, when they made him the Rosh Hashiva, shekol azvachim shenachalim v'shenizbechu shelo lishman kasherim ela shelo alu lebalim l'shem chova chutz min ha-pesach u'min ha-chatas. Okay, so what did Ben Azai say? This is Ben Azai, yeah. He says he changes the description slightly. He says kol azvachim shenechalim, all the edible zvachim that are brought with shelo lishma are still kosher lemizbeach, but they just don't count. He basically says exactly the same as the Tanna Kama, except that instead of saying kol hazvachim, he says kol hazvachim hanechalim. And what does that exclude? Lo asif ben azai ela ha'ola. The ola, he said, basically is one of those that if it was brought shelo lishma, then it is possible lemizbeach. But lo chachamim. That the chachamim disagreed with him, and the halacha is that the ola can even be brought even if it was brought shelo lishma. Okay. Mishnah Gimel, Bo Bayom Amru, Ammon Moav Mahen B'Shvius. Okay, so we need to take a little bit of background over here. When we're talking about the agricultural cycles in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, we know about the agricultural cycles that that we've got 6 years of taking chumas and masros, and in the third year we take mas, third and the sixth year we take mas ani, and in the other years we take mas sheni, and in the seventh year is shmita. There are no chumas and masros. Okay, now that only applies in Eretz Yisrael min Torah. However, in neighboring lands, Chachamim made a gezerah that you should keep the agricultural laws in the neighboring countries as well, because we don't want people to leave Eretz Yisrael because it's too much bother to farm in Eretz Yisrael. And also, if you're close to the border, you don't want to make mistakes about, do you take Trumas and Masters? Do you not take Trumas and Masters? You take Trumas and Masters. But what do you do in Shemitah? Because Shemitah doesn't apply in Chutz La'aretz. Okay, so you're carrying on farming in Chutz La'aretz because it's mutar, but what do you do about Trumas and Masros in the seventh year? Okay, you take Trumas and Masros, but what do you do? Is it Maseh Oni or Maseh Sheni? So that's the question that we're dealing with over here. Is that Ammon and Moab is a territory that's adjacent to Eretz Yisrael, and we want to know what's the halacha of Ammon and Moab in the seventh year. What do you take, Maseh Oni or Maseh Sheni? Okay. Gaza Rabbi Tarfon. So Rabbi Tarfon says Maseh Ani. Gaza Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. It says Maseh Sheni. Okay. Straight away we have a machlokes Tanaim. Rabbi Tarfon says it's Maseh Ani, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says it's Maseh Sheni. Amar Rabbi Shmuel. Elazar ben Azariah. Alecha raya lelamed. You have the burden of proof. She ata machmir. Why is it more machmir to say Maseh Sheni? Because Maseh Sheni has got a shtickle kodesh in it, right? You've got to redeem it, take it to Yerushalayim, eat it in Yerushalayim, as opposed to Maseh Ani, which just has to be given to a poor person. Okay, so he says the burden of proof is on the one who wants to be machmir, because this whole thing is a din rabbanan. It's not. We must assume that rabbanim are going to be makil where they can. Okay, so. You're being machmir. Shekola machmir alav raya lelamed. But in general, if you want to be machmir, you got to prove why you're going to be machmir. Interesting principle there. Amar lo Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Yishmael achi, my brother Yishmael, ani lo shenisi miseder hashanim. I didn't change the order of the shanim, right? Because what's the pattern is that any time that you have a maser oni year, it's followed up by a maser sheni year. The third year is Maseh Ani, and the following year is Maseh Sheni. Sixth year is Maseh Ani, and then the following year must be Maseh Sheni, right? Tarfon Achishina, Rabbi Tarfon is the one who changed. And I love Raya Lalamed. Now he must prove why the year after Maser Ani is going to be another year of Maser Ani. Hey Shiv Rabbi Tarfon, Mitzrayim Chutz La'aretz. Now, learn it out from Mitzrayim, which is also Chutz La'aretz. Ammon and Moab is also Chutz La'aretz. Okay? Ma Mitzrayim Maser Ani B'Shvius Af Ammon and Moab Maser Ani B'Shvius. Now, what we just learned over here that just got introduced agav by way of giving evidence is that up until now, everyone had agreed that Mitzrayim had a halacha of having to take, if there were Jews in Mitzrayim, then they would have to give Maser Ani in the Shvius year. So the same thing goes for Ammon and Moab. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah snorts and retorts. He says, Bavel is Chutz La'aretz as well. Okay? And we also have halacha in Bavel, Bavel, Maaseh Sheni b'Shvius, Af Ammon and Moab, Maaseh Sheni b'Shvius. And in Bavel, we have Maaseh Sheni during the 7th year. So you can learn the same thing out from Bavel and say, so Ammon and Moab should have the same halacha. All right. So now what we have learned now is that we have two places in Chutz La'aretz that have conflicting halachas. Mitzrayim has Maaseh Ani and Bavel has Maaseh Sheni. Okay. Amar Rabbi Tarfon. So Rabbi Tarfon comes back and argues, Mitzrayim shehi krova asa'u hamaser ani sheyu aniyei Yisrael nismachim aleha b'shvius. Af Ammon and Moab shehem krovim nasim maser ani sheyu aniyei Yisrael nismachim alehem b'shvius. So the reason why Mitzrayim has maser ani is because we want to be able to give the maser ani to the aniyim of Eretz Yisrael. Babel is far away. They're not going to send their Maaseh Ani to Israel anyway. So we let them keep Maaseh Sheni instead. Okay, but Ammon and Moab is also right next to Israel, so it should also be Maaseh Ani. Okay, there we go. Now we have some svara. Amar lo Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He says, Arei ata kemahanan hamon. You're making all this big pretense like you're giving money to the aniyim. The ein ata ela kemafsid nefashos. But what you're doing is you're destroying neshamas over here. Why? Why are you doing this? Because kovea ata es hashamayim milehorid tal umatar. You are preventing the heavens and the earth from bringing down rain and dew. Oh, that's a heavy accusation, but he brings a pasuk from Malachi. Hayikba Adam Elohim ki atem kovim osi v'amartem b'meh kavanucha hamaser v'hatroma. So the pasuk from Malachi is saying that how do we get the bracha basically from Hashem? And the bracha is coming from Maser and Truma. And that Maser is Maser Sheni that we're talking about over here. This is one of these things that brings bracha into the world. So all very well that you're giving money directly to the aniyim, but that's the small tap that you're opening up over there. Which we want to open the big tap mina shamayim that the shefa should go on to all of Israel, and you're preventing this from happening. Amar Rabbi Yeshua Hareini kameshiv al tarfon achi. He says, I'm going to give an answer that's going to support Rabbi Tarfon, my brother. Aval lo le'inyan devarav. Not the way that he argued it, but I have another support for his position. Mitzrayim Maaseh Chadash uBavel Maaseh Yashan. The fact is that these gezeres that were made on Mitzrayim and on Bavel are from different generations of Chachamim. Okay, Mitzrayim was done recently, and Bavel was done a long time ago. Okay, and what we're talking about with Ammon and Moab is also like it's a current discussion that we're having over here. Let us follow the precedent of the most recent enactment, which is Mitzrayim. And therefore, let us enact the rule based on Mitzrayim, not based on Babel, because it's the most recent ruling. Mitzrayim Maaseh Zakenim, Ubavel Maaseh Neviim. So Mitzrayim was enacted by the Chachamim of recent times, and Babel was done by the Neviim. And the same thing that we're talking about over here. This is us talking about. We're not Neviim. We're just Chachamim. Yidon Maaseh Zakenim, Maaseh Zakenim. Val Yidon Maaseh Zakenim, Maaseh Neviim. Okay, so we learn from similar cases. Nimnu v'gamru Ammon and Moab ma'asrin maser ani b'shvius, and they put it to a vote, and people voted for Rabbi Tarfon's position, that it'll be maser ani b'shvius. Okay, so the matter is wrapped up, and now Yoshe bar Rabbi Yossi ben Damascus etzel Rabbi Eliezer belud. So Rabbi Eliezer was alone in Lud at this time, and Rabbi Yossi came to visit him. Amalo ma chidush haya lachem bebeis hamidrash hayom. Okay, so what's new from the base midrash? Amalo nimnu v'gamru amanu Moav masri masish ani b'shvius, and he reported back what had happened that day that they'd made this vote. Bacha Rabbi Eliezer v'amar. So Rabbi Eliezer cried out of joy and said, Sod Hashem lireyav u'brisa lo hodiyim. He says, this is wonderful. The secrets of Hashem, he guides the people to make the right decisions. Say v'emer lahem, go back and tell them from me. Al tachoshe leminyanchem. Don't worry about it, whether you voted right or wrong. Mekubal ani mi Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. I have a Masorah from Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Sheshama meirabo v'rabo meirabo ad halacha l'Moshe Sinai. He says he has an unbroken chain of tradition. Ad halacha l'Moshe Sinai is difficult to take that literally, because halacha Sinai, there is no truma and maser from Ammon and Moab in the first place. It's only Eretz Yisrael that's applicable. We're talking about a Gezerah Derabanan, but nonetheless, there's a very strong Masorah that I've got. I think it's kind of an exaggeration, but making the point that really this is a very strong tradition that we have about Ammon and Moab. That Ammon and Moab ma'asrin maser ani b'shvius. That is the Masorah that I've got. And again, Rabbi Eliezer is a very strong Baal Masorah. He always wants to know what did the Chachamim say, and he always sticks to what he has heard and what he believes is right. And interesting. I'm just thinking about it now, that possibly parallels the reason why he got into trouble and was put into cherem, because he had such a strong position about the Tana Shel Achnai, and he didn't accept what the Chachamim voted against him, and he was still arguing against them. And they said, "I'm sorry, that's not allowed. You cannot do that." And they stuck him in cherem because he was still sticking with his position even against what the Chachamim were voting. And here in this Mishnah, he's saying, "Don't worry about that. You voted wrong." And the Chachamim would say, "We're not worried. Don't worry. We lo b'shamayim hi." Everyone else says to Rabbi Eliezer, "Lo b'shamayim hi." It's not in the shamayim for us to vote. And he seems to be stuck in his position that it actually is bin a shamayim. It is b'shamayim, and so he's not happy when people vote against things that shamayim believes is wrong. Anyway, that's my little thesis there about Rabbi Eliezer. All right. Next case, Mishnah Daled, Bo Bayom Ba Yehuda Ger Ammoni. So there was a certain person called Yehuda who was from Ammon, and he had converted. And he stood in front of them and said, Amar lahem ma'ani lavo b'kahal. Can I marry a Jewish girl? Amar lo Rabban Gamliel asurata. I'm sorry, you're an Ammonite, and we have a halacha that an Ammoni is not allowed to marry a natural-born Jewish girl. You can marry a convert. You can even marry a mamzeres, but he cannot marry somebody from the core kehila. Amalo Rabbi Yeshua mutarata. Rabbi Yeshua disagrees with Rabban Gamliel. Says, no, you can marry him. Rabban Gamliel says to him, what are you talking about? Hakasuv omer lo yavo Ammoni Moavi bekal Hashem gam dor asiri. This is a pasuk min Torah we're talking about over here. How can you tell him that he's mutar? Amar lo Rabbi Yeshua v'chi Ammonim u'Moavim bimkoman. Are you telling me that the Ammonites are that are the actual Ammonites that used to be at the time that the Torah was given? Kvar Allah Sancherev melech Ashur u'bilbel es kol ha'omos. Sancherev had this policy of uprooting people from their lands. He said when he conquered lands, he picked up the people and moved them to somewhere else, because then they were much less likely to revolt, which he was probably right. Okay. And the people who were living in the land of Ammon were not the original Ammonites. They're all mixed up, and we don't know that this is an Ammonite. And since most people in the world are not Ammonim, he is. We assume that he's not an Ammonite. Shinemar v'asir gevulos amim v'asudehem sosesi v'orid Kabir Yoshevim. Read the translation of that from Yeshaya, please.
It
Give me
says,
the yeah.
it says um, I have removed the boundaries of peoples and have plundered their treasures and have brought down dwellers in strongholds.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So Rabban Gamliel is not giving up so quickly. Amar lo Rabban Gamliel, Hakasuv Omer v'achrei chen ashives shavus b'nei Ammon. But it says afterwards that I will return the exiles of Ammon. Ukvar chazru, and they've now returned. Amar lo Rabbi Yeshua, nope. Hakasuv Omer v'shavti yeshivus ami Yisrael. It also says about Yisrael that I will return them. Vadayin lo shavu, and Bnei Israel still haven't returned from their exile. So why should Ammon have returned as well? Hitziruhu lavo b'kahal, and apparently Rabban Gamliel accepted this position and said, "All right, that's a fair point," and they allowed him to marry into the community. Okay,
Oh,
that was a lot of new Mishnah. So I'm glad we had a lot of extra time to do it.
yeah, I'm thinking that. Okay, we have Gimel Hay. Regarding cooling vegetables that were cooked with oil of truma and a tebel yom touched it, but Elias ben Yehuda says, leader of Bartosa, said in the name of Rabbi Shua, sorry, I'm losing the page here. Okay. Said the tebel yom has rendered puzzle the entire dish of vegetables. Rabbi Akiva says to Rabbi Shua's name, in Rabbi Shua's name, he has rendered puzzle only the place of his touch. Regarding a Tahoe person who was chewing some food and it fell upon his clothing and upon a leaf of truma, a loaf of truma, the loaf is Tahoe. If he was eating crushed olives and most dates, or any fruit whose pit is the desire to suck, and he fell upon its clothing and upon a loaf of truma, the loaf is tameh. If he was eating dried olives or dried dates or any fruit whose pit he did not desire to suck, and it fell upon his clothing and upon a loaf of truma, the loaf is tahor. Both the tahor person and the tebel yom share these laws. The Meir says both these and those are tameh in the case of a tebel yom. The beverages of a tameh person often to person affect heksha both when he is desirous of them and when he is not desirous of them. But the sages say a tebel yom is not considered a tameh person. Regarding produce of Misa that was rendered susceptible to tumor by a beverage, and it was touched by a tebel yom by unclean hands, we separate tumas Misa from it in tahara because the Misa rishon is a shlishi, and a shlishi is tahor in the case of kul.
Okay. Machshirin.
Yeah, Blut. Good. If one found in the city a lost object, if the majority of the people are non-Jews, the finder is not required to announce the find. But if a majority of the population are Jews, the finder is required to announce it. If the population is equally divided, the finder is required to announce it. If one found in that city bread, and we rule on the bread based on the identity of the majority of bakers, if it was bread made of fine flour, we rule on it based on the identity of the majority of those who eat bread made of fine flour. Rabbi Yehuda says if it was black bread, we rule on it based on the identity of the majority of those who eat black bread. If one found in that city meat, we rule on the meat based on the identity of the majority of butchers. If the meat was cooked, we rule on it based on the identity of the majority of those who eat cooked meat. Regarding one who finds produce on the road, if the majority of people bring their produce into their houses, it is exempt from tithes. But if the majority take it to the sell in the market, it's obligated in tithes. I'm sorry. It is regarded in tithes. If half bring to the houses and half take it to the market, it is the mai. Regarding a storeroom into which Jews and non-Jews place produce, if the majority is from non-Jews, it is definite tevel. And if the majority is from Jews, it is the mai. Half is from non-Jews, half from Jews, definite tevel. And these are the words of Ramea that the sages say, even if they are all non-Jews and a single Jew places produce in the storehouse, it is demai.
Okay.
And para. Whatever needs immersion in water, whether under biblical law or under rabbinic law, requires tamei mekatos, ashes of the paraduma. And a person who is fit to sprinkle mekatos through contact or carrying an erev on which heksha was affected, water that has not been sanctified, and an empty vessel that is tahor from mekatos, are also rendered tame through contact or carrying. These are the words of Ramea. But they come say through contact and not through carrying. Any ezov that has an accompanying name is invalid. This is an ezov, is valid. Greek is ezov, blue ezov, Roman ezovs, and desert ezovs are invalid. As ezovs are truma, that is tame, is invalid. Ezov of truma is that is tahor should not be used for sprinkling, but if it's sprinkled with it, it is valid. One may not sprinkle with sprouts or with an ezov that is berries. One is not liable for after being sprinkled with sprouts upon entering the temple. Rabbi Eliezer says one is not liable even if after being sprinkled with an ezov that had berries. These are separate stalks that are not developed. An ezov that was sprinkled with is valid for the tahara of a metzora. If one harvested it for firewood and liquid fell on it, he dries it and it's valid. If one harvested for food and liquid fell on it, even though he dried it, it's disqualified. If he harvested for mekatos, it's as if he harvested for food. These are the words of Ramea, Reb Yehuda, and Reb Yossi, and Reb Shimon say it is as if he harvested it for firewood.
Okay. Chrysos.
Okay. Those liable to katos are conditional asham. I'm sorry. Those liable to katos or unconditional ashams for whom Yom Kippur passed are liable to bring them after Yom Kippur. Those liable to conditional ashamas are exempt, and one for whom a doubtful situation of sin occurred on Yom Kippur, even at dusk, is exempt for the entire day, atones. A woman who is obligated to bring a bird, katos, or doubt for whom Yom Kippur passed, is obligated to bring it after Yom Kippur since it renders her fit to eat of the offerings. A bird, katos, that is brought because of a doubt, if after its neck was nipped, it became known to her, it must be buried. If one sets aside 2 salam for an asham, and he purchases it with the 2 rams for an asham, if one of them became worth 2 salam, he may be offered for his asham, and the second one must graze until it develops a blemish. Then it's sold, and its proceeds are deposited for a voluntary offering. If he purchased with them from 2 rams for ordinary meat, one became worth 2 salam and one became worth 10 zuz. The one worth 2 salam should be offered for an asham and the other for a meila. One for his asham and one for the ordinary meat. If the one for the asham became worth 2 salam, it should be offered for his asham and the second for his meila, and he must bring with it a sela and its fifth. We're going to finish this.
Yeah, after Chrysos comes Meila.
Meila, okay. I'll get it ready. Okay. And of a comma. It is inadvisable to class for the deaf, mute, a mentally deranged person, or a minor. If one wounds them, he is liable, but if he wounds others, they are exempt. It is inadvisable to class with a slave or with a woman, or if one wounds them, he is liable, but if they wound others, they are exempt, although they must pay later. Should the woman become divorced or the slave freed, they are obligated to pay. If one strikes his father or his mother and inflicts a wound upon them, or if one wounds another on Shabbos, he is exempt from all of them because he is liable for his life. If one wounds his own Gentile slave, he is exempt from all of them. If one cuffs another, he must give him a sela. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Yossi the Galilean, amana. If he slaps him, he must give him 200 zuz with the back of his hand. He must give him 400 zuz. And if he pulls his ear, tears his hair, spits at him, and spittle reaches him, removes his cloak, or uncovers a woman's hair in the street, he must pay 400 zuz. This is the general rule. It all depends on his covet. It all depends on his covet. Said Rabbi Kiva, even the poorest of Jews are looked upon as though they were the sons of noblemen who lost their wealth, for they are the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. There was an incident of one who uncovered a woman's hair in the street. She came before Rabbi Akiva, who sentenced him to give her 400 zuz short. So he said to him, Rabbi, give me time. And he gave him time. He waited for her until he saw her standing at the entrance of her courtyard, and then broke a jug which contained oil worth an isra in her presence. She uncovered her head and was scooping it up and placing her hands on her head. And he set up witnesses against her and came before Rabbi Akiva. Said he to him, Rabbi, this one I should give 400 zuz. Said he to him, you have said nothing, because if one wounds himself, although he may not, he is exempt. Yet if others wound him, they are liable. And if one cuts off his own shoots, although they may not, he is exempt. Yet if others cut off his shoots, they are liable.
Okay.
Okay.
And Ervin.
Everything. So, if a large roof is adjacent to a small one, the large one is permitted, but the small one is prohibited. If a large courtyard was breached into a small one, the large one is permitted, but the small one is prohibited, because it is like the stair entrance of a large one. If the courtyard was breached into a public domain, one who brings from there into a private domain or from a private into it is liable. These are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. But the sages say, from it into the public domain or from the public domain into it, it is not liable because it is like a carmelis. If if a courtyard was breached into a public domain on two of its sides, or if a house was breached on two of its sides, or an alley with crossbeams or poles were removed, they're permitted on the Sabbath, but prohibited in the future. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi says if they are permitted on that Sabbath, they are permitted in the future, and if they're prohibited on the future, they are prohibited on the Sabbath. A secondary story built upon two houses or bridges under which a roof passes, one may carry beneath them on Shabbos. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda, but they become prohibited. Rabbi Yehuda said, we may make an error for an open alley, but the sages prohibited it.
Okay. Zehu.
All right.
That's it for today.
Good. Good that we had long extra time today.
Yes, we read it. We did
tomorrow,
very long today.
Seagulls is short.